Morning, it's Mr. Lancaster. We're going to do Billionaire Boy Chapter 7, where I got up to Beech Class. So, this is gerbils on toast. I bought you something, said Joe. He and Bob were sitting on the bench in the playground, watching the more agile kids play football. Just because you're a billionaire doesn't mean you have to buy me anything, said Bob. I know, but Joe brought a large bar of dairy milk out of his bag. Bob's eyes couldn't help but light up a little. We can share it, said Joe, before snapping off a tiny square of chocolate, then breaking that tiny square in half. Bob's face fell. I'm only joking, said Joe. Here. He handed Bob the bar to help himself. Oh no, said Bob. What? Said Joe. Bob pointed. The grubs were walking slowly across the playground towards them, right through the games of football. Not that anyone dared to complain. Quick, let's make a run for it, said Bob. Where? The dining room. They wouldn't dare go in there. No one does. Why? You'll see. When they burst into the dining room, it was completely empty, aside from a lone dinner lady. The grubs burst in a few paces behind them, their gender still uncertain. If you aren't eating, get out, shouted Mrs. Trafe. But Mrs. Trafe, said either Dave or Sue. I said out. The twins reluctantly retreated as Joe and Bob tentatively made their way to the serving counter. Mrs. Trafe was a large, smiling soul of dinner lady age. Bob had explained on the way to the canteen that she was nice enough, but her food was truly revolting. The kids in the school would rather die than eat anything she cooked. In fact, they probably would die if they ate anything she cooked. Who's that then? Said Mrs. Trafe, peering at Joe. This is my friend Joe, said Bob. Despite the vile smell in the canteen, Joe felt warmth spread through him. No one had ever called him their friend before. Now, what would you like today, boys? Mrs. Trafe said with a warm smile. I have a very nice badger and onion pie, some deep-fried rust, or for the vegetarians, I have jacket potatoes with sock cheese. It all looks so nice, said Bob, lying, as the grubs stared in at them through the grimy windows. Mrs. Trafe's cooking was truly unspeakable. A typical week's menu for the school canteen looked like this. Monday, soup of the day, wasp, gerbils on toast, or hare lasagna, vegetarian option, or brick cutlet, all served with deep-fried cardboard. Dessert, a slice of sweat cake. Tuesday, soup of the day, caterpillar consommé, macaroni snot, vegetarian option, or roadkill bake, or slipper frittata, all served with spider's web salad. Dessert, toenail ice cream. Wednesday, soup of the day, cream of hedgehog, parrot kedgeree, may contain nuts, or dandruff risotto, or bread sandwich, slice of bread between two slices of bread, or char-grilled kitten, healthy option, or soil bolognese, all served with either boiled wood or deep-fried iron filings. Dessert, squirrel dropping tart with cream or ice cream. Thursday, Indian day. Soup of the day, turban. To start, paper poppadoms, A3 or A4 sizes, with chutney. Main course, wet white tandoori, vegan. Or moth korma, spicy. Or newt vindaloo, very spicy. All served with bogey bargies. Dessert, a refreshing sand sorbet. Friday, soup of the day, terrapin, pan-fried otter steaks, or owl quiche, kosher, or boiled poodle, not suitable for vegetarians, all served with a slice of gravy. Dessert, mouse mousse. It's so hard to choose, said Bob, desperately scouring the trays of food for something edible. I think we'll just have 2 jacket potatoes, please. Is there any chance I could have it without the sock cheese? Pleaded Joe. Bob looked hopefully at Mrs. Trafe. I could sprinkle on some earwax shavings, if you prefer. or a showering of dandruff? Offered Mrs. Trafe with a smile. I think we'll just have it totally plain, please, said Joe. Some boiled mould on the side, perhaps? You are growing boys, offered Mrs. Trafe, wielding a serving spoon of something green and unspeakable. I'm on a diet, Mrs. Trafe, said Joe. Me too, said Bob. That's a shame, boys, said the dinner lady dolefully. I have a smashing dessert on today, jellyfish and custard. My absolute favourite too, said Joe. Never mind. He took his tray to one of the empty tables and sat down. As he put his knife and fork into the potato, he realised that Mrs. Trafe had forgotten to cook it. How are your spuds? Called Mrs. Trafe across the hall. Delicious, thank you, Mrs. Trafe, Joe called back as he pushed his raw potato around the plate. It was still covered in soil, and he noticed a maggot burrowing out of it. I hate it when they are too well done. This is perfect. Good, good, she said. Bob was trying to chew his, but it was so utterly unedible he started crying. Something the matter, boy? Called Mrs. Trafe. Oh no, it's so delicious that these are tears of joy, said Bob. Ding! Once again, that wasn't your doorbell, reader. That was the bell to signal the end of lunch. Joe let out a sigh of relief. Dinner hour was over. Oh, what a shame, Mrs. Trafe, said Joe. We have to go to our maths lesson now. Mrs. Trafe limped over and inspected their plates. You've hardly touched them, she said. Sorry, it was just so filling. And really, really tasty, though, said Joe. Seconded Bob, still crying. Well, it doesn't matter. I can put them in the fridge for you and you can finish them off tomorrow. Joe and Bob shared a horrified look. Really, I don't want you to go to any trouble, said Joe. No trouble at all. See you then. And I've got some specials tomorrow. It's the anniversary of the bombing of Pearl Harbor, so it's Japanese Day. I'm going my armpit hair sushi, followed by tadpole tempura. Boys? Boys? I think the grubs have gone, said Bob as they sneaked out of the canteen. I've just got to use the bog. I'll wait for you, said Joe. He leaned against the wall as Bob disappeared through a door. Usually Joe would have said that the lavatories were smelly, and he'd have been horrified to have to use them after the privacy of his own en-suite bathroom with emperor-sized bath. But the truth was that the toilets didn't smell as bad as the canteen. Suddenly, Joe sensed two figures looming behind him. He didn't need to turn round. He knew it was the grubs. Where is he? Said one. He's in the boys' loo, but you can't go in there, said Joe. Well, not both of you anyway. Where's the chocolate bar? Asked the other. Bob's got it, said Joe. Well, we'll wait for him then, said the grub. The other grub turned to Joe, a deadly look in its eye. Now give us £1, unless you want a dead arm, that is. Joe gulped. Actually, I'm glad I bumped into you guys. Well, guy and a girl, obviously. Obviously, said Dave or Sue. Give us £1. Wait, said Joe. It's just, I wondered if... Give him a dead arm, Sue, said a grub, revealing for perhaps the first time which of the twins was male and which was female. But then the grubs grabbed Joe and spun him around, and he lost track again. No, wait, said Joe. The thing is, I want to make you two an offer. Chapter 8, The Witch. Dring! The bell is a signal for me, not you, said Miss Spite sharply. Teachers love saying that. It's one of their catchphrases, as I'm sure you know. The all-time top 10 of teachers' catchphrases goes like this. At 10. Walk, don't run. A non-mover at 9. Are you chewing? Up 3 places to 8. I can still hear talking. A former number 1 at 7. It doesn't need discussion. A new entry at 6. How many times do you need to be told? Down 1 place at 5. Spelling. Another non-mover at 4. I will not tolerate litter. New at 3. Do you want to pass your GCSEs? Just missing the top spot at 2. Would you do that at home? And still at number 1. It's not just yourself you've let down, but the whole school. Taking the history lesson was Miss Spite. Miss Spite smelt of rotten cabbage. That was the nicest thing about her. She was one of the school's most feared teachers. When she smiled, she looked like a crocodile that was about to eat you. Miss Spite loved nothing more than giving out punishments, once suspending a girl for dropping a pea on the floor of the school canteen. "That pea could have had someone's eye out," she had yelled. Kids at the school had fun thinking up nicknames for their teachers. Some were fond, others cruel. Mr. Paxton, the French teacher, was Tomato, as he had a big round red face like a tomato. The headmaster, Mr. Dust, was called the Tortoise, as he looked like one. He was very old, extremely wrinkly, and walked impossibly slowly. The deputy head, Mr. Underhill, was Mr. Underarms, as he ponged a bit, especially in the summer. And Mrs. MacDonald, the biology teacher, was called either the Bearded Lady or even Hairy McClary from Donaldson's Dairy, as she, well, I imagine you can guess why. But the kids just called Miss Spite the Witch. It was the only name that could ever really have fitted and was passed down through generations of pupils at the school. All the kids she taught passed their exams, though. They were too scared not to. "We still have the small matter of last night's homework," Miss Spite announced with an evil relish that suggested she was desperate for someone to have failed to do it. Joe reached his hand into his bag. Disaster. His exercise book wasn't there. He had spent all night writing this intensely boring 500-word essay about some old dead queen. But in the rush to get to school on time, he must have left it on his bed. Oh no, he thought. Oh no, 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 no. Joe looked over at Bob, but all his friend could do was grimace sympathetically. Miss Spite stalked the classroom like a Tyrannosaurus Rex, deciding which little creature it was going to eat first. To her evident disappointment, a field of grubby little hands held aloft essay after essay. She gathered them up before stopping at Spud. "Miss," he stammered. "Yes, Spud," said Miss Spite, drawing out her words as long as possible so she could relish this delicious moment. "I did do it, but—" "Oh yes, of course you did it," the witch cackled. All the other pupils except Bob sniggered too. There was nothing more pleasurable than seeing someone else get into trouble. "I left it at home." "Litter duty," the teacher snapped. "I'm not lying, miss, and my dad will be at home today. I should have known. Your father is clearly penniless and on the dole, sitting at home watching daytime TV, much as you will no doubt be doing in 10 years' time. Yes?" Joe and Bob couldn't help but share a smirk at this. Said Joe. "If I called him and asked him to run the essay over here, would you believe me?" Miss Spite smiled broadly. She was going to enjoy this. "Spud, I will give you 15 minutes exactly to place said essay in my hand. I hope your father is quick." "But," started Joe. "No buts, boy. 15 minutes. "Well, thank you, miss," said Joe sarcastically. "You're quite welcome," said the witch. "I like to think that everyone gets a fair share to rectify their errors in my class." She turned to the rest of the class. "The rest of you are dismissed," she said. Kids started to spill out into the corridor. Miss Spite leaned after them and screamed, "Walk! Don't run!" Miss Spite couldn't resist another catchphrase. She was the queen of the catchphrase, and now she couldn't stop. "It doesn't need discussion," she called after her pupils randomly. Miss Spite was on a roll now. "Are you chewing?" she howled down the corridor to a passing school inspector. 15 minutes, miss," said Joe. Miss Spite studied her little antique watch. 14 minutes, 51 seconds, in point of fact. Joe gulped. Was Dad going to be able to get there that fast? Chapter 9, last chapter today. Finger. "Finger?" asked Bob, as he offered half of his Twix to his friend. "Thank you, mate," said Joe. They stood in a quiet corner of the playground and contemplated Joe's bleak fate. "What are you going to do?" "I don't know. I texted my dad, but there's no way he can get here in 15 minutes. What can I do?"
A few ideas raced through Joe's mind. He could invent a time machine and travel back in time and remember not to forget his homework. It might be a bit hard to do though. As if time machines had ever been invented, then maybe someone would have come back from the future and prevented Piers Morgan's birth. Joe could go back to the classroom and tell Miss Spike that the tiger had eaten it. This would only be half a lie, as they did have a private zoo and a tiger called Jeff and an alligator called Jenny. Become a nun. He would have to live in a nunnery and spend his days saying prayers and singing hymns and doing general religious stuff. On the one hand, the nunnery would give him sanctuary from Miss Spite, and he did look good in black, but on the other hand, it might get a bit boring. Go and live on another planet. Venus is nearest, but it might be safer to go to Neptune. Live for the rest of his life underground? Perhaps even start a tribe below the surface of the Earth dwellers and create a whole secret society of people who all owed Miss Spike some homework. Have plastic surgery and change his identity. Then live the rest of his life as an old lady called Winnie. Become invisible. Joe wasn't sure how this might be achieved. Run to the local bookshop and buy a copy of How to Learn Mind Control in 10 Minutes by Professor Stephen Haste and very quickly hypnotise Miss Spite into thinking he had already given her his homework. Disguise himself as a plate of spaghetti bolognese. Bribe the school nurse into telling Miss Spite he had died. Hide in a bush for the rest of his life. He could survive on a diet of worms and grubs. Paint himself blue and claim to be a smurf. Joe barely had time to consider these options when two familiar shadows loomed behind him. "Bob," said one of them, in a voice neither high nor low enough to determine its gender. The boys turned round. Bob, tired of fighting, simply handed them his slightly nibbled finger of Twix. "Don't worry," he whispered to Joe. "I've concealed a large number of Smarties down my sock." "We don't want your Twix," said grub number one. "No," said Bob. His mind started racing. Could the grubs possibly know about the Smarties? "No, we wanted to say we are very sorry for bullying you," said grub number two. "And as a peace gesture, we would like to invite you round for tea," prompted grub number one. "Tea?" asked Bob, incredulous. "Yes, and maybe we can all play Hungry Hippos together," continued grub number two. Bob looked at his friend, but Joe just shrugged. "Thank you, guys. I mean, guy and girl, obviously." "Obviously," said non-identified grub. "But I'm a bit busy tonight," continued Bob. "Maybe another time," said the grub, as the twins lolloped off. "That was weird," said Bob, retrieving some Smarties that now had a faint taste of sock. "I couldn't imagine a night when I would want to go and play Hungry Hippos with those two, even if I lived until I was 100. "Yeah, how strange," said Joe. He glanced away quickly. At that moment, a deafening roar silenced the playground. Joe looked up. A helicopter was hovering overhead. Very quickly, all the football games broke up, and the kids raced out of the way of the descending aircraft. Items from hundreds of packed lunches were whisked up in the air by the force of the blades. Packets of Quavers, a mint chocolate aero, even a Muller fruit corner danced about in the whirling air, before smashing to the ground as the engine shut down and the blades slowed to a stop. Mr. Spud leapt out of the passenger seat and raced across the playground holding the essay. "Oh no," thought Joe. Mr. Spud was wearing a brown toupee that he held onto his head with both hands, an all-in-one gold jumpsuit with "Bum Air" emblazoned on the back in sparkly letters. Joe felt like he was going to die of embarrassment. He tried to hide himself behind one of the older kids. However, he was too fat, and his dad spotted him. "Joe! Joe! There you are!" shouted Mr. Spud. All the other kids stared at Joe Spud. They hadn't paid much attention to this short, fat new boy before. Now it turned out his dad had a helicopter. A real-life helicopter. Wow! "Here's your essay, son. I hope that's okay. And I realise I forgot to give you your dinner money. Here's £500. Mr. Spud pulled out a wad of crisp new £50 notes from his zebra-skin wallet. Joe pushed the money away, as all the other kids looked on in envy. "Shall I pick you up at 4 p.m, son?" asked Mr. Spud. "It's okay, Dad, thanks. I'll just get the bus," muttered Joe, looking down at the ground. "You can pick me up in your helicopter, mate," said one of the older boys. "And me," shouted another. "And me! 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 Pick me!" Soon all the kids in the playground were shouting and waving to get this short, fat, gold jumpsuited man's attention. Mr. Spud laughed. "Maybe you can invite some of your friends over at the weekend and they can all have a helicopter ride," he pronounced with a smile. A huge cheer echoed around the playground. "But Dad!" That was the last thing Joe wanted, for everyone to see how monstrously expensive their house was and how much crazy stuff they owned. He checked his plastic digital watch. He had less than 30 seconds to go. "Dad, I gotta run," blurted out Joe. He snatched the essay out of his father's hand and raced into the main school building as fast as his short, fat legs would take him. Running up the staircase, he raced past the unfeasibly old headmaster, who was making his way down on a standard stair lift. Mr. Dust looked at least 100 years old, but was probably older. He was more suited to being on an exhibit in the Natural History Museum than administering a school, but he was harmless enough. "Walk, don't run," he mumbled. Even very old teachers are fond of catchphrases. Hurling himself along the corridor to the classroom where Miss Spite was waiting, Joe realised half the school was following him. He even heard someone shout, "Hey, Bumfresh boy!" Unnerved, he pushed on, bursting into the classroom. The witch was holding her watch in her hand. "I've got it, Miss Spite," proclaimed Joe. "You are 5 seconds late," she proclaimed. "You've got to be kidding, miss." Joe couldn't believe anyone could be so mean. He glanced back behind him and saw hundreds of pupils were staring at him through the glass. Such was the eagerness to catch a glimpse of the richest boy in the school, or perhaps even the world. Noses were pushed up against the glass so they looked like a tribe of pig children. "Litter duty," said Miss Spite. "But miss, a week's litter duty." "Miss, 1 month's litter duty." Joe decided to say nothing this time and sloped across the classroom. He closed the door behind him. In the corridor, hundreds of little pairs of eyes were still staring at him. "Oi, Billionaire Boy!" came a deep voice from the back. It was one of the older boys, but Joe couldn't tell which one. In the sixth form, all the boys had moustaches and Ford Fiestas. All the little mouths laughed. "Lend us £1,000,000, someone shouted. The laughter was now deafening. The noise clouded the air. My life is officially over, thought Joe. Until next time.